Okay, folks, if we were in class right now, this is the way that you would be seeing me if we were face to face. All right, let's get into lecture number 14. Last time we were together, by the way, we talked about the presidential election of 1796. This was a very, very odd presidential election. We had the President John Adams, who was a Federalist, and we had Thomas Jefferson, who was a Republican and serving as the vice president. You can only imagine how effective that administration was. We also talked about the presidential election of 1800, and this was a crazy, crazy presidential election. We saw the strange thing that came out with the negative publicity, so to speak, here that the Federalists were making about Thomas Jefferson with his alleged affair with a slave and mistress, and her name was Sally Hemings. And the crazy thing about it was that when the electoral votes were turned in, the Republicans had a tie vote between Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson. It took 36 votes in the House of Representatives to determine that Thomas Jefferson was the president and Aaron Burr was the vice president. All right, we also talked about some of the philosophies of the Republican parties with Thomas Jefferson, who envisioned a virtuous and enlightened society, a crusade against ignorance. You have in your notes there about the Republican mother, and of course with an emphasis on education. We're going to see such individuals as Noah Webster, which developed the American Spelling Book, the American Dictionary of the English language. We also went into what we could call the Industrial Revolution in the United States here. It wasn't anywhere compared to what it was in Europe, but you got exposed to Samuel Slater with Slater's Mill. This was the first modern factory in America. One of the writers that we had, and we have very few writers at this period of time, but one of the best known was Washington Irving. Went through that the other day, Rip Van Winkle, Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And I think we closed out the class period about the construction of Washington, D.C. The person that was commissioned to lay out the nation's capital was Pierre L'Enfant. If you're traveling the metro system in Washington today, Washington District of Columbia today, you'll stop undoubtedly at L'Enfant Plaza. Alrighty, so let's go into Thomas Jefferson now. And I've got a couple of photographs here. And I want to spend a few minutes talking to you about Thomas Jefferson. I think you saw these photographs the other day. But if you'll just take a look at it, and I'll try to do this in this way instead of putting it in a documents camera down below anyway. But Thomas Jefferson was a rather tall individual. Look at his appearance here. He has a freckled face. Originally, he had red hair. Later, it would become gray hair. Indifferent to appearance. His clothes never matched. He walked to his own inauguration. You know, that was during a time in which you actually could walk to an inauguration. Today, you know, you'd be very foolish for a president, vice president to do that sort of thing. Let's see here. He would often wash his hands. He would wash his feet just as much as he would wash his hands. Just a kind of peculiar taste with that. Visit his home in Monticello if you wish to here. And it's pretty much the way Thomas Jefferson left it there too. Probably our smartest president was just a prolific reader, and he would buy books. In fact, it would break his own treasury, and he'd have to sell the books so he could get enough money to buy new books. All right, but anyway, Monticello is well worth your time there, and if we were face to face, I'd tell you about some more of the inventions that Thomas Jefferson personally developed with that. All right, so anyway, let's move on, and I'm going to go to my documents camera here, so let's flip it over here. And for Thomas Jefferson had as his Secretary of State, James Madison. Later in the class period, if we have enough time, I'll show you a likeness of James Madison. And not today, but the next time we get together, after James Madison is president, I'll show you a likeness there of his wife, Dolly Madison. Notice the spelling of the name, Dolly Madison. She served as a White House hostess. Remember, Thomas Jefferson is not married. He was a widower. So they need a White House hostess, and Dolly Madison served in that capacity. And before you start thinking bad thoughts here, there was no relationship between Dolly Madison and that of Thomas Jefferson. All right, moving on here. In the 1804 presidential election, Thomas Jefferson was a people's president a very well-liked individual, by most people. Federalists didn't care for him very much. But in the 1804 presidential election, Thomas Jefferson, who was a Republican, ran against the Federalists. I don't think I even marked this here, the Federalists of Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. And to show you how popular Thomas Jefferson is, in the Electoral College, Thomas Jefferson got 162 electoral votes. And for Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, it was 14 electoral votes. So very popular with Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson also was able to reduce our national debt by about half. He reduced it from 83 million to 45 million. Can you only imagine if that's what our national debt was today? Our national debt will never be resolved. Last time I looked at it, it was something on the effect like each person in our country would have to pay up $50,000 to eliminate our national debt. Somewhere we've got to stop this bleeding, this hemorrhage of cash flow here going out and not enough coming in. All right, so anyway, now Thomas Jefferson also reduced the size of the military, and in fact he reduced it to two army regiments. I'm sorry for muddling around on that, and one artillery battery, and a very small military for that period of time. Thomas Jefferson, on the other hand, was not a pacifist. He believed in peace as our passion, but he was not a pacifist. He established in 1802 the United States Military Academy, which is located in West Point. Perhaps you know a few of your friends that attended West Point. If you're following in your textbook, you can see an artist's rendering here. Let me see what page that is on here. It's on page 199. I always hope you follow along in your textbook. And I'll share a photograph with you. If we look at this photograph here, and I took this from Trophy Point at West Point a couple of years ago, and it's the same view as you're seeing in your textbook, So it's a beautiful place there. When you go to Trophy Point at West Point, that's where we have many of our military treasures that we've captured from other countries like France or Spain or England, and they're on display there. Here's another view. Same view taken from Trophy Point. Beautiful place to visit. You will never regret your travels there. Here's a book here. It's a guidebook to West Point. And if you look in the background here up at the top, this is the Cadet Chapel, which is present there. Most beautiful structure. It is open to the public. And when you walk in there, you just, or me, I know, you just can't help but be impressed when you look down the long aisles, the pews, the long aisles of pews, and you just think that, some of our greatest military leaders of all time actually attended West Point and actually worshipped here in this chapel, the Cadet Chapel there. And I'm talking about such individuals as U.S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, Douglas MacArthur, John Eisenhower, so forth. Anyway, neat place to visit there. And also to give the Navy credit, and Thomas Jefferson did not do this, this would be James K. Polk, that established the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, and I believe that was established in 1845, I believe it was. So anyway, and that's kind of interesting with that. All right, so let me get some of these things out of the way here, and let's move on with our lecture here. Now, I'm not going to get into this in great detail. In the past, I've done so years ago, and it's kind of a boring subject, and I spent a lot of time on it unnecessarily. But I want you to recognize a classic court case here, which is Marbury v. Madison. It was 1803. Marbury v. Madison. It took place on Thomas Jefferson's tenure in office here. And to make this kind of short, it had never been challenged before that the Supreme Court could rule upon the constitutionality of an act of Congress. And a long story short here, it's a lengthy case to go through. Mr. Marbury filed suit against James Madison. James Madison was Secretary of State at that time. And nevertheless, it made its way to the Supreme Court, and they developed this precedence and confirmed this precedence of judiciary review, that the Supreme Court can rule upon the constitutionality of an act of Congress. And that's the way it is today here. If the House and the Senate passes a resolution, passes a law, and it goes into effect, and if the Supreme Court rules that law to be unconstitutional, then they can rescind that. All right, so I need you to recognize this. Marbury v. Madison established the precedence of judiciary review. All right, let's move on with our lecture here, folks. Now, the individual associated with this and with the Supreme Court is a man by the name of John Marshall here, and I apologize for that. At a later point in the semester, we'll talk about James Marshall, but he was instrumental with the gold rush. And I want to share a likeness with you here of John Marshall as soon as you get a chance to copy this down. He was the Chief Justice of the United States from 1801 to 1835 here. Here is a likeness of him. He was a cousin to Thomas Jefferson. He is a Federalist. Thomas Jefferson was a Republican. There was not a whole lot of fondness between those two individuals here. Both very, very great men. I have the greatest admiration here for John Marshall. John Marshall, as said, was Supreme Court Chief Justice from 1801 to 1835. And what he's going to do, he's going to bring the Supreme Court up to the same level as that of the executive branch and the legislative branches here. At that time, we had the Supreme Court took a secondary role, and through the efforts of John Marshall, he was able to bring to parity all three branches to allow the Supreme Court to come to the same levels as the presidency in the House and the Senate here. And when I don't know why I keep saying James Marshall, it's on my mind, but when John Marshall passed away in 1835, there was a period of mourning throughout the United States. And in many of the major cities, to include that, Philadelphia, there would be bells that would be rung, in remembrance of John Marshall. And you probably recognize this bell. We refer to it as the Liberty Bell, as present in Philadelphia today. But during this mourning period for John Marshall, and they were ringing this bell, it actually produced a crack in this bell. And you can see where the crack is located right there. I'm telling you, if you ever see this bell, you will be impressed with it. It's quite large. When you look at it here, you can't get anywhere near the idea of the size of this bell. I mean, it's as large as a person here. Please do not do this. I did this, and you should not do it. But you can actually take your fingers and put your fingers down in the crack. That crack there is so wide with that, too. But you don't need to do that. You're not allowed to touch that. I'm not sure where the Liberty Bell is today in Philadelphia. I think the other day I showed you the Liberty Bell Pavilion, but it's my understanding today that it has been removed. All right, so anyway, that's James Marshall there. And let's move on. I don't have a likeness out here of Napoleon Bonaparte. In my Western Civilization class, we spent quite a bit of time around the French Revolution talking about Napoleon. Very, very interesting individual here. They called him Le Petit Caporal, the small corporal, l'étendu, the shorn one, so forth here. Most of you probably can recognize it. You need to remember his name, but I probably won't test you on that, unless you're taking a Western Civilization class. And you certainly didn't need to do so. All right, so I want to show you something here, and I'm going to go back to my camera, and let's look at the map behind me. And let me try to get out of the way, and hopefully you can hear me with my microphone across the way there. And if you remember when we had the Treaty of Paris at an earlier time, and France gave up all of this area here. They gave up all of this area, and that went to Spain. All right, we all remember that from the last time. This, of course, went to England here, and there's no French presence. But by 1803, a secret treaty has taken place, and we're not even aware of it, but this is a treaty that takes place between Spain and France. And under that treaty, the Treaty of San Ildefonso, all of this territory right here will now return to France. So, and we're not even aware of that. So this now belongs to France. We have over here, this is Spanish-held territory. All right, so anyway, and that's kind of interesting with that. Now, for Napoleon also was quite interested in establishing coffee plantations, sugar plantations down on some of the Caribbean islands. And I'm talking about such places as Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Saint-Domingue. But at that time, there was a slave revolt that was taking place in Saint-Domingue. That's where Haiti is located today. And Napoleon sent a large army down to Haiti, if you want to call it that today anyway, to squash this rebellion led by Toussaint Louverture. And as it turned out, the French army was plagued with yellow fever, and it just decimated the French army. And that's when Napoleon made the statement, damn sugar, damn coffee, damn the colonies, and I'm getting out of this. All right, so anyway, in the meantime, if we think about New Orleans, and when New Orleans under the Pinckney Treaty, when New Orleans was controlled by the Spanish, we were able to navigate freely, the United States navigate freely the Mississippi River, and also use New Orleans as a port city. But when the French regained control of this area, they started harassing American shippers on the Mississippi River and not being cooperative in allowing us to use the port city of New Orleans. So let's go back to my camera here, and let me introduce you to a couple of individuals here. And so what we ended up doing, this is under Thomas Jefferson, we sent two representatives, two members of an envoy here, Robert Livingston, who was the chief negotiator, and James Monroe. James Monroe, who had been the former governor of Virginia, and sent them to Paris to sit down with representatives of Napoleon and negotiate the purchase of New Orleans. All right, so I'm going to say that one more time. The intention of these two individuals was to negotiate the purchase of New Orleans. Now, I wish I could tell you exactly how it went, because I just don't know. We get too many conflicting stories with this, and some people will tell you that it was actually Monroe or actually Livingston that negotiated with the French diplomats and actually said, would you be willing to sell, in addition to New Orleans, would you be willing to sell all of this territory that is present here that the French had acquired? Other individuals will tell you that actually Napoleon said, oh, by the way, would you be interested in that territory too? Remembering now that the original goal, the original plan was just to purchase New Orleans itself. And so nevertheless here they worked out an agreement for $15 million. The United States would purchase all of this territory which is present here. And I'm going to go back to my camera here so you can see this. And what we refer to that as was the Louisiana Purchase. $15 million, Louisiana Purchase. It was a steal, my friends. It honestly was. Now, the interesting thing about it, Livingston and Monroe don't have the authority from the President of the United States to purchase this area. They don't have the authority to obligate the United States for spending $15 million. But nonetheless, they did it anyway and returned to the United States. And I would ask you at this time, what do you think the response is from President Jefferson? Is he going to be happy about this, or is he going to be disappointed with this? And obviously, you're going to tell me he's going to be extremely happy with it. And it was a deal here. We named that area of Louisiana, and in 1812, Louisiana became the 18th state. I did not mention to you at an earlier time that Ohio became the 17th state in 1803. All right, so anyway, that brings us up to 18 states here. All righty, so I would ask my class at this time, if you went out and you purchased a large plot of land, what would be the one thing that you would want to do? And I hope what you would tell me, you want to explore the land. And certainly that's what Thomas Jefferson wishes to do likewise here. And so anyway, and I don't know if any of you have been to the West. I'm going to go back to my camera here. Now, I just came back from New Mexico and Arizona just a couple of weeks ago, folks. But I'm going to tell you now, if you live in this part of the world here where we live, we have certain birds that are there. We have certain types of trees that are present here. But if you go to this part of the world over here, it is an entirely different environment there. What I experienced in New Mexico and Arizona is nothing like Walker County, Alabama. It's completely different. They have trees, they have birds, but it's different trees, it's different birds. And so, anyway, with any exploration that's going to take place over here in this Louisiana territory, we're going to see a lot of new things there. Now, with this area in the Louisiana territory, acquired through the Louisiana Purchase, there's no surveying that has been done there. I mean, there's no territorial boundaries. It's just like, it's an area which is out there. All right, so let's go back to the camera here, and I'm going to move down a little bit here. And two individuals were commissioned, if you will, to lead an exploration and go into this area, this unexplored area where practically no white man has been before, maybe a few French-Canadian explorers, but really nobody had been there to speak of. This is Native American land. Now, these two individuals, let me get a position here so you can see their names here. All right, we have Meriwether Lewis, and this is Meriwether Lewis here. I've been told don't use my finger anymore, but anyway, there goes my finger right there. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark here. A little bit of disagreement on what the ages of these two individuals are. Meriwether Lewis was the younger one of the two. Meriwether Lewis, by the way, he would have been the private secretary, personal secretary to Thomas Jefferson. And here he is right here. And the other individual is William Clark, who is a little bit older. I think Clark was like 34 years of age, and Meriwether Lewis was about 30 years of age at this time. Let's see if I dated it for you folks here so you can see. Yeah, I did. It's 1804 to 1806. Let's see if I have some other information here with this. Here's another likeness here, Meriwether Lewis. Okay. And anyway, so these two individuals are going to organize an expedition, and they will sail upon a ship. It's a keelboat, by the way, which is known as the Corps of Discovery. And I need you to recognize that. Now, this expedition will leave across the river over on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River, across from St. Louis, and they will leave in 1804 and travel up the Missouri River. All right, now, this is done by a keelboat. There will be 48 other individuals that will be present there. So we have 48 men, Lewis and Clark. Clark had with him his slave York, and Meriwether Lewis had a Labrador dog that was present there also. Okay, and the dog, by the way, just happened to jump into my mind, was named Seaman. S-E-A-M-A-N. So the expedition will leave in 1804, going to it's like going to the moon. You actually have no idea what's going to be out in front of you. So I'm going to go back here, all right, and then we'll try to use my microphone the best we can here. I want to track on this. If you're looking over a couple of pages, and I don't want to lean out over away from you folks, so turn my textbook page. So just turn your textbook a couple more pages, and you'll see the route that was taken by Lewis and Clark. But the place in which they left from here was over in Illinois, and actually crossed over to where St. Louis is, and went up the Missouri River. If you've ever been west and been up into this area of Missouri, and westward from there, you'll find that the Missouri River is a big, mean river. It's not as large as the Mississippi River, but it's a tough river. And so they're going to be moving in this direction here. Now, this means they have a heavy keelboat. This boat could be rowed. You could erect a sail on it. You could actually pole it, if you understand what I'm talking about, where you take 10 guys on each side of the boat and actually use poles and just literally push yourself against the current. So every foot that you're maneuvering, you have this Missouri River trying to push you back in the same direction in which you came. So making it 2 or 3, 4 miles a day was a good day, because you're moving against the current. So they're moving up like this, going up the Missouri River here, entering into lands that no white person had ever seen before. They see a lot of Native Americans. Some of the Native Americans were friendly, some were less than friendly. But quite honestly here, the 2 years that these 48, 50 men were gone, they only suffered one death, and this was a man that had appendicitis, and he's buried above the banks there of the Missouri River today. All right, they made their way on up here and spent the first winter here at Fort Mandan. Now, Fort Mandan is located on the Missouri River. Here's a reconstructed Fort Mandan. You can go there today if you wish to do so. Not really that impressive, but it's okay. It's all right with that. All right, so let's go back over here and continuing on here. And they kept getting up in this area, and you would have, like, I'm going to use my hands here, such as this, and you would have these rivers, and the rivers would divide into this part, and this part. So they were actually wasting a lot of time going up, just blind end, dead end rivers with that. And so what they ended up doing, they got the services of a young girl. Let's see, did I write her name out? I did write her name out. I'm going to flip back here so you can see her name. And I'm going to let you write that down because you need to know this now. We get a lot of different pronunciations on this. Here's my preferred pronunciation. It's she is a 16-year-old Shoshone. She was pregnant at that time, but she's 16 years old, and her name translates in Shoshone. It means bird woman. All right, Sacagawea, or Sacagawea, Sacagawea. Here's a likeness of her right here, and I'll show you where this is. This is a wood carving, and it's a full-size wood carving of Sacagawea. And she joined Lewis and Clark. She could speak the Native American languages. She was familiar with the area. She'd grown up in these areas, so she was able to serve as a guide for them and tell them the proper rivers to actually traverse, to actually take with that. All right, she did give birth to a little baby. Jean-Baptiste was the name of the child, Jean-Baptiste. All right, so anyway, I'm going to go back to my camera here and the map because I need to carry a little bit further. Making their way here, all the way up here, such as this, all the way down here, and then they finally got to the Rocky Mountains. Now, obviously, the Corps of Discovery, a heavy kill boat, is not going to negotiate the Rocky Mountains. So what they had to do, they left the Corps of Discovery behind, and Sacagawea was able to negotiate with some of the Indian tribes there for some horses. And so for the 50 men that were with Lewis and Clark, 48 men with Lewis and Clark, they were actually able to go across the Rocky Mountains, cross the Continental Divide, which changes the flow of the currency. Let's go back here, which means that the current from the rivers here, of the Snake River and the Columbia River, now flows to the west, such as that. And so when they got to the other side of the Rockies, they constructed canoes and were able to very quickly go down to this area right through here. And what they made a decision to do when they were there, instead of making the long trek back, they were going to wait for a ship. And they would wait for a ship. They constructed these huge bonfires. They didn't light these bonfires, but they just constructed them so that if a ship sail was sighted, they could light these and create this huge flames and smoke, and the people on the ships would be able to see them and then carry them back to the other side by the ocean anyway. And here they constructed a fort. And this fort, they gave the name Fort Clatsop. This is a reconstruction of the fort today. Fort Clatsop is an interesting place to visit. It's run by the National Park Service. Let's see if I have another brochure. Here's a brochure here of Fort Clatsop. Like I said, it's a National Park Service site today. This is where you'll find that wooden carving there of Sacagawea. And they waited throughout that winter there of 1805. And they finally realized, they gave up and just realized, that no ship was going to be sighted there. So the only thing that they can do is now just reverse their trek that they came on the year before. And so they're now going to make their way back here, this time paddling up the Columbia River, the Snake River. You can actually take trips on the Columbia River, Snake River today, take cruises there. It's kind of interesting, very beautiful country there. I'd be careful in going to areas such as Portland. Portland is just a very unfriendly city here, folks, particularly in light of what's taking place today. And that's just disgraceful. But anyway, made their way back here, crossed the Rocky Mountains, and lo and behold, when they did so, there was the Corps of Discovery. Now they have the current going in their favor here, and they made their way across here, the return such as this, and made their way. And now they're moving 15, 20, 25 miles a day with the current in their favor, and finally made their way all the way back here to St. Louis. A magnificent adventure here. Today, if you visit McLeod Landing in St. Louis, let me do it like this, and you'll see a monument there, which is to Lewis and Clark. You can also see the dog there, which is a seaman. All right, that's kind of interesting too. Let's see what else I have in store for you. I'm going to go back to my camera here so you don't see me muddling around with everything. All right, so that's that. Now I want to show you some coins here, and you know my fascination with coins. Maybe these will show okay. Some of you are probably familiar with the golden dollar. Let's see if I can get a little contrast with this. These golden dollars, which are certainly not gold. This one, I have it dated to year 2000. I think they came out in 1999. You can't see this very well, but it has a likeness here of Sacagawea, and she's holding the little baby there that she gave birth to, which is Jean-Baptiste. All right, in 1804, we had a change. Let's see if I can find this. We had a change in the types of 5-cent pieces. You can see this is Thomas Jefferson, which is on the nickel as you recognize it. And most of the nickels of that period will have a Monticello on the reverse surface of it. And if we look at this one here, this is in 1804, and you can't see this very well. I would pass this around the class if we were in class. And it shows you a white man and a Native American shaking hands there with peace pipes. In that same year, we came out with another 5-cent piece, and you cannot see this, but if you check your change here, and if you get a 1904, this is a bicentennial, you'll find out the core discovery on the back of that nickel. And in 2005, we came out with a different nickel, and this is a reverse surface here, which shows you a buffalo, and that's what these 48 people with Lewis and Clark were seeing. And we also changed the obverse surface here to where we got a close-up of Thomas Jefferson here. And later in that year, we came out with two different nickels in 1804 and 1805. You can see, you can't see that very well, but it's showing you the Pacific coast there at Astoria, and it's a quotation there by William Clark, and it's saying, "Ocean in view, oh the joy, oh the joy." All right, so anyway, that was kind of interesting. I wish I could tell you that this had a happy ending, and it in some ways it did, in some ways it did not. You know, for York, who was a slave of William Clark, later he was given his freedom by William Clark. And for Meriwether Lewis became the governor of the Louisiana Territory. But unfortunately for Meriwether Lewis, he had things that talked to him in his head. And they also had an alcohol-related problem there. And he was staying at this building here, it was like an inn. It's called Grinder's Stand. It's up in the Natchez Trace there in Holdenville, Tennessee. And nonetheless, here he ended up, they think, taking his own life. He may have been murdered. I'm not sure with that. We get differing views on it. And if you go up to Grinder's Stand today, you can find a burial site there of Meriwether Lewis. And also a monument there. There's the inscription on that burial site there. So anyway, that's Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. All right, now another individual. Let me go back to my camera here, and then I'll flip it back to the map. Another individual that led an exploration here was Zeb Pike. Zebulon Pike, a lieutenant, and he did not keep the accurate records like Lewis and Clark did, by the way. And what Zebulon Clark did in 1806, I had to go back to my camera and look behind me here, and he led an expedition that went up the Mississippi River, then came back down, and then went across the country here on horseback, and actually went up here to a peak that bears his name. That's called Pike's Peak, by the way. Never did scale Pike's Peak. You can go up there today if you wish to do so. You can drive up to the top. And then made his way down here like this and came back here up to the St. Louis region. Did not maintain accurate records with that too. And hence we're going to get some distortions here. This area be referred to as the Great American Desert, by the way. And many people will get that impression that that's just nothing but a Great American Desert, you know, for many, many years to come. All right, let's go back to our camera here, and I'm using up a lot of time here. All right. Now, most individuals were happy with the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. As I told you earlier, we had some Federalists, particularly in the New England states, that were not happy, you know, with Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is a Republican. He's from the South. He's from Virginia. And so these upset Federalists in New England formed a group which they gave themselves the name the Essex Junto, or it was a Northern Confederacy. And what they had plans to do was actually to secede from the United States of America. And I dare bet that your teachers have never taught you that before. Your teachers have always taught you about Southern states wanting to secede from the Union, but never heard a story about Northern states wanting to secede from the Union. And they needed a leader. And they went to Alexander Hamilton and asked Alexander Hamilton if he would serve as the leader of the Essex junta. And Hamilton said no. And then they turned to the Vice President of the United States, Aaron Burr, and asked him. And Aaron Burr likewise said no. And then Alexander Hamilton, who was always putting his nose into everything, made several disparaging remarks about the character of Mr. Burr. And so Aaron Burr challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel, and that's the way in which disputes to your honor were handled at that time. So let me move on here. Those are the two individuals here, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. And sure enough, Hamilton challenged Burr to a duel, and you have to defend your honor. And so these two individuals, and they each had their seconds with them, and dueling was illegal in New York at that time. So what they ended up doing is on the 11th of July in 1804, crossing the river and going over to New Jersey, where Weehawken is located. And Weehawken, New Jersey. And in fact, if you go there today, you can see a marker there. I cut this photograph out of a magazine, by the way. I've been through Weehawken, but I've never stopped here at where the dueling site took place. I was concerned for my life and for my safety there, and it's a dangerous place to visit here, so I really don't recommend that you go there yourself. And so what these two individuals did, they squared off, took each one had a 54 caliber pistol, such as what you're seeing right here. And those are the actual pistols. It came from a matched set of pistols that were owned by Alexander Hamilton, and each backed off the appropriate number of paces there. And then the presenter, or the guy that's the referee, the moderator, says present. And when you present, then you have either of two choices. You know, you can either let your opponent take a quick shot, and if he misses you, then you can take close, careful, steady aim, and that's if he missed you. If your opponent took a quick shot and hit you, well, you know, the duel's over with that too. And so when the moderator said present, Alexander Hamilton cocked his pistol very quickly and was bringing it down to fire at Mr. Burr, and the pistol went off and it shot straight up into a tree and dislodged a leaf, and the leaf floated down and landed on the hand of Alexander Hamilton. And now we have Mr. Burr, and Mr. Burr standing there 12 paces away with a cocked pistol, taking slow, careful, steady aim, and bearing in mind that there's evidence to lead us to believe that Hamilton and Burr had the same mistress at one point in their lives anyway. And anyway, to make a long story short, Mr. Burr full cocked the pistol and shot Alexander Hamilton. The bullet entered into the abdomen and lodged in the spine, and went through the liver of Alexander Hamilton, and he died that night. All right, so anyway, that was the end of Alexander Hamilton. And of course, I often think about this. We're running out of time. You know, can you imagine a Vice President of the United States today, Mike Pence, or former Vice President Joe Biden, getting themselves engaged in a duel to the end? I just don't see that as taking place here. All right, now that's a pretty good point to stop. We spent a lot of time here talking about Lewis and Clark today. We're not quite through with Aaron Burr, the Vice President of the United States. He is going to flee, and he has to flee New Jersey, you know, because there's he could be indicted for murder, you know, murdering a prominent American citizen, just murdering an individual. All right, so let's stop for the day here, folks. A lot of material. You need to stay up with this material. We've got an examination on the horizon here. Okay, thank you very much.